What is that? Basically, the Dutch Netherlands. It's Roman, the Netherlands, because the Dutch got all the way to the Rhine, they were a little bit further up. So I want to investigate the Romans in Holland. And that seemed to be something that I wanted to do. So I took this class. It was called Mediterranean Cities. And it was the person in charge. His name was Dr. Charles Frazee, wonderful man. And the goal of the class was that everybody chooses a city out of antiquity, and they follow the course of that city throughout time, all the way up into the period of time around the Renaissance. So that's kind of the idea. Everybody gets to choose a city, and the idea is that when you meet every time, because it's kind of a symposium-like conversational course, you basically everybody's in charge of their own city. So you start off and you ask the question, so what's going on in Alexandria between 200 to 100 BCE? Oh, that's pretty interesting. What's going on politically, economically, in a religious sense, okay? What's going on in Athens right now? You chose Athens, right? What's going on now between 200 and 100 BCE? Oh, that's what's going on politically, economically, so you see where we're going with this. Okay, so every class meeting, we do another 100 years, right? Okay, so I planned Trier. I'm doing Trier. We're going to follow Trier all the way through because by golly, I'm doing, Roman in Carmani and Fury. This is so bad. So my professor comes up to me, Dr. Frazee, and he says, do you really want to do Trier? I said, yeah. There's not a lot of materials at a certain point. Why don't you do Ephesus? Oh, okay. Why? Well, nobody else is doing Ephesus. Okay. All right. I'll do Ephesus. Go. Thank you. It's a great city. Trust me, you'll love it. Oh, okay. So as we're going through this course, apparently the other students didn't want to do their work. And so as we're going the rounds through cities, theirs became shorter and shorter, and we're leaving class too early. So Dr. Frazee came up and said, can you elaborate more? I know you like to talk. Can you make it longer? Just prepare a little bit more. So by the end of the semester, it was a class on Ephesus. So I had all this great material, and I even got credit officially as a student preceptor for the course. Wow, that's pretty amazing. So it becomes master's time. What are you going to do? I'm going to do, you guys got this right, Germania Inferior. And Dr. Frazee says, I'm going to be head of your committee. Maybe you want to do Ephesus. I said, why? Well, because you amassed so much material. You've already got a great start on it. I said, oh, okay, sure, I'll go with it. So I start writing my master's thesis. They were very, people being added to it, and they got longer and longer and longer, and years start going by, and 997 pages later, the longest master's thesis in California State University, Fullerton history. I finally finished this master's thesis on Ephesus in 4 volumes. And it is a walking tour as you're going through the city of Ephesus as if you're in the middle of the 2nd century. I'm telling you, and of course, from there, I learned the significance of Artemis of the Ephesians, and that really Artemis was synonymous with the idea of Ephesus. The two are really one. But I didn't focus completely on that. That was the end point. And my thesis statement was, of course, Pausanias' statement, the thesis of why Ephesus was important. And of course, Artemis was the center of that. Okay, so I'm learning Greek and Latin. I'm going to UCI. And I'm going to do my PhD work on? That's right. I'm doing it on the catacombs. You got it. You figured that out. So I'm like, okay, we're doing the catacombs now. And then, something happened that never happens in academia. Scholars start fighting each other. It's really a surprise. They start fighting over what the materials are. And I became pretty upset. There's a fight between the historians in one department and the classicists on the other. And the historian says, yes, I can use these sources. And the classicists actually tell me I can't use certain sources. And they want to do more literary. And the historian, there's like a civil war between the two. I'm going, this is great. So I'm feeling really down and out. And my friend invites me to an event. And it was a meeting together of it was the I'm trying to remember what the media. I should remember right off the top of my head. It was the Society of Biblical Literature meeting at Claremont, the SBL. So I arrived there. I'm really sad and upset, and I'm hearing Marvin Meyer speaking, and he comes up to me. Actually, I see him from afar. He walks up to me, very famous scholar, translated the Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Judas guy. He worked on the Nag Hammadi, and he actually sees me, talks to me first, and invites me out to eat with him, which is pretty great. So we were having a conversation, and he says, "So, what are your areas?" And I talk about. He says, "Ooh, Artemis, that's good." Ooh, really? Uh, then, um, then I come back, and the guy by the name of Sam Scheibler says the same thing. Hey, this is really good. Why don't you? And Sam and Marvin and the others are all talking. I didn't know what was going on behind closed doors. All I know is all of a sudden they pushed me in front of the head of the school of religion. Her name is Karen Torgerson. And they said, just go ahead and tell them, that you're doing Artemis of the Ephesians. Like, okay. So I talk with her, and I talk about my master's thesis, and I talk about Artemis of the Ephesians. And she says, so you're going to do your PhD work here? I said, it's like, I'm not sure that's a question or a statement. I said, yeah, you do an Artemis of the Ephesians, welcome to Claremont. So I got into Claremont Graduate University in, I'd say, maybe between 30 to 35 minutes. And we'll take care of the rest. So apparently I'm doing Artemis. So you can guess my PhD work was an Artemis, the Ephesians. And then I ended up going to Ephesus and spending a lot of time there. Over the years, I've clocked about being in Ephesus in the general area about almost 8 months, if you count all the times. So I have, been there. I've spent time the first time I was there, I was this outsider. Uh, the archaeologists are like, well, but then we got a new person by the name of Sabine, and I became an insider. And so I'm working with them, and I got a chance and all these great opportunities. Wow. And then I got to work with the American archaeologists as well as the Turkish archaeologists. And that led me to take my dissertation and make it into a book, which is still available, although the price is way high right now. I noticed it's cheaper on Kindle. At the same time, more people buy it, go back down to 65. So I don't know what to say. Okay, end of book plug, because that would be rather shameless of me to plug a book. I would never do that, especially through the medium of Zoom. This will never happen. I have dignity. So anyway, moving right along. Okay. So that brings us to the topic at hand. And of course, the first thing people are going to ask is, still, why is this important at all? It's just an obscure goddess. Why am I even here? So I'm going to give you 10 reasons why you're here. How's that? 10 reasons why this topic is important. Here we go. First of all, as we shall discuss in a few moments, the entire belief system devoted to Artemis of the Ephesians from ancient times has been largely deciphered from cult objects and rituals to their calendar and personal beliefs. Now, I want to sink in a little bit. You're like, you got to be exaggerating. I'm not exaggerating. If you have my book, Where is my information coming from? Not from secondary sources, coming from the Ephesians themselves. Apparently, they have this prolific problem of inscribing everything everywhere. They just don't stop. You cannot believe how many inscriptions they have and how meticulous they are in describing every single thing they're doing, even right to the position of where they're standing. It's almost ridiculous. The other archaeologists at Ephesus know this, but the world really doesn't know this. And I think it should be known. And the problem is that I've seen lots of books of Artemis and the Ephesians, and the information is still scattered, except, of course, book. Otherwise, you find a little here, a little there. And see, and when it comes to ancient times, most people say, well, we know Judaism, and we know early Christianity, and we know, the imperial cult. That's getting pretty well known now. So the Roman imperial cult, some of the mystery cults, some of them here and there, but the cult of Artemis of the Ephesians, that's kind of a big deal. And of course, obviously, I look at it from a historical as well as an anthropological perspective, and obviously an archaeological, and as a scholar of religion. And yes, we'll go through that. So we know everything from even what kind of wine they poured, what kind of incense they used, down to not only the cult rituals, but right down to everybody's names. You mean everybody's names? Okay. Oh, this is how much we know. This is really bad. We know, for example, in the Britannium, those who did the offerings, yeah, we know their names. I'll just kind of give you a little sample here. We know that if I'll just throw out a date, around 54 CE. We know that the Hierarchus, who is the announcer, his name is Menottes. Yep, Menottes. He was there from 41 to 54. We know that the person who did the flute, blew the flute during the offerings. We know that if we're still using 54, we know that person is Mithras. And we know the Hieroscopus. He's the person who reads the entrails. We know his name around that time is Marcus. So, it's Menottes, Metras, and Marcus. I call them the three M's. We know their names. In fact, I can go on. Menottes is followed by Epicrates and so forth. Before him is Granius Capto. I'm telling you, we know everything. It's ridiculous how much we know. Or if you want to do the Spondulus, the flute offering person, Alexandros is before, Perausius is after that, and Trophimus. Are you guys getting my point yet? Right? Okay, so I've got their names, so I can make a list of their names for hundreds of years. Is this good? You guys learning things pretty quick? And we know exactly how they did the offerings. We know exactly even how they cut the meat. We know exactly who bought the meat. We know the prayers. We know the hymns. We know when they sang the hymns. Are you guys liking this? We even know who stood in what position on the processions, who followed the other. We know, I'm going to give away some of the mysteries today. Woohoo! Is this fun? Right? Yeah, it's too much fun. At the playground for scholars. Okay, and we have many here today. Second, we're on number 2, right? Second, the cult of Artemis Ephesia is not just a random belief system from antiquity. It was considered one of the most important belief systems in the Greco-Roman world, even receiving mention in the Bible, with the magic words connected to this belief system, understood as the most powerful in the world, according to many of those living around the Mediterranean at that era. Even Clement of Alexandria. It's amazing of how many people will say this. Okay, so obviously many of you are connected or are interested in biblical studies, so I'll go ahead and just read this little part here. According to the Acts of the Apostles, Demetrius the silversmith instigated a riot in protest against the Apostle Paul, who he believed was not only bent upon the destruction of their way of life in Ephesus, but who was also insulting their goddess, whom they all served. He declared, "And there is danger Not only that this trade of ours may come into disrepute, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis will be scorned, and she will be deprived of her majesty that brought all Asia and the world to worship her. Stop there for a moment. According to the New Testament, the book of Acts, all the world is worshiping Artemis. It's kind of interesting testimony, right? Of when it comes to gravitas. It's a great source for that. We keep on going. As the angry mob gained momentum, the city was filled with confusion. The crowd knew exactly where to go. Rushing into the theater were all shouted as one, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians," for 2 hours straight, a long time. In order to quell the disturbance, the town clerk instructed those assembled, saying, "No, citizens of Ephesus, who is there that does not know that the city of the Ephesians is the temple keeper of the great Artemis and of the statue that fell from heaven? Since these things cannot be denied, you ought to be quiet and do nothing rash," unquote. Isn't this interesting? Because the image. So you see already some important parts of Artemis of the Ephesians just from the New Testament. You're seeing that the image is also important. You're seeing that the city is directly connected, and their patronage and their pride is connected directly to Artemis herself, right? And of course, you can see the economic aspect, right? The trade, the pilgrimages. Because remember, Ephesus was the site of one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, which is the Temple of Artemis, which is, of course, connected to Artemis. Okay, so you have already this concept of a universal goddess. The fame even testified by the New Testament. You have others too, like Pausanias. He wrote a travelogue in the 2nd century. He says, "All cities," is a quote from him, "worship Artemis of Ephesus, and individuals hold her in honor above all the gods." Well, that's an interesting testimony, unquote, because it comes from somebody who wrote a travelogue of ancient Greece, mainland Greece, going through all of the gods of mainland Greece. And yet after all that, still says this is the most important one over here, right? That's a kind of a big deal. And we find evidence of that all over. We have so many images that have survived of Artemis of the Ephesians spread out throughout the Mediterranean world. We find them on the shores of Gaul, France. We find them in Britannia or the area of England. We find them in Vermont. I got to stop you. In Germany. That's not the ancient names sort of thing. We find them, I guess I say Illyria, I'll count. We find them in North Africa. We find them in Egypt. We find them all over, all places, Palestine, Caesarea Maritima, by Jerusalem. We find them all over Anatolia. We find them along the coastline of the Black Sea. They're everywhere. And we also realize something, because we'll see this. You're going, "But Dr. Rietveld, how come we don't have tons and tons of writings about it?" We actually do have tons and tons of writings about it, but not accessible to the English-speaking world. And a lot of it is still in Greek. But at the same time, let's be honest, the cult of Isis was more popular with the literati, the upper echelon. So Isis was the goddess, the universal goddess for them. Although parts of Isis will merge with Artemis, you'll see this. But still, right? You still have that. But I'll be honest. Artemis is the goddess of the common clay. I'm serious. She's a goddess of, silversmiths, coppersmiths, and metalworkers, maybe because of the connection with the Idaean Dactyls, who are these mystical, magical metalworkers, okay? But she is also connected to just those who are I think I say the middle class, because that's problematic when it comes to the ancient times, but those people who are not so wealthy, but who are merchants. You know what happens with merchants? They travel everywhere. Go places, but not merchants and people who are involved in various commercial enterprises. She's popular with farmers and fertility in that sense. So it's the common rabble, which, by the way, is evidenced even within the book of Acts. Remember, it's the common people who are rising up. It's the silversmiths, right? Our trade. So that's why we find less in these various areas. But we also have to realize that there's something called the grammata, Ephesian grammata. And these are the sacred words, the magical words connected to Artemis of the Ephesians. And so what's interesting about this is these words, aske, kataske, lix, tetrax, dunamos, taosi, these ancient words, which I knew too fast, were considered the most magical words in antiquity according to people at that time. And they were directly connected to Artemis of the Ephesians, said to be even on her cult statue. Is this interesting? We do find evidence of these words or a progression of these words. Sometimes they just have the first letter and the Greek alphabet to represent each word, each sound. We find this all over the place. It is pretty amazing. And I've done research on this, and it turns out these words go all the way back to the 5th century BCE. And I go through the inscriptions of all places. They were real popular in Sicily and southern Italy, but they're connected to Artemis of the Ephesians pretty early on. And so you not only get this universal goddess conception, you got this, she has great magic. Why the Ephesian letters, as you call it, are so important is, again, it's the common gravel, the common clay. What do you mean by that? Well, in magic, and many of you study, there's so many elaborate recipes of how to do things. And people, they get kind of lazy. They go, can we have like a catch-all for everything? Like, one that's going to work for fertility, one that's going to work for marriage. Can we have one? The ultimate abracadabra. So the Ephesian letters become that abracadabra, the ultimate. So I'll give you an example. There's an example where this person's in a fighting match, and he's fighting against a contender. He puts the amulet of the Ephesian letters on around his leg, and he beats the guy in 7 bouts. Hey, athletic victory. Thank you, Ephesian letters. These other people were wanting to get married. Okay, well, you're going to have the priest recite the Ephesian letters going clockwise around you as a protection against what? Anything that will stop fertility. Because, when you get married those days, it's like, hey, where's the baby? Is it a boy? You got to remember, that's that period. And you got to protect the womb. And so you do this circumlocution, because they're saying the words as you're going around to, protect them, because these words were also used against fighting, yes, demons. Interesting thing about the cult of Artemis of the Ephesians, it has an elaborate demonology. Yeah, so they're demons. There's there's evil spirits that Artemis has used to protect you from, and so she is a demon slayer, a demon fighter. Isn't that fascinating? So you use the Ephesian letters in that way, and the Ephesian letters are also used to not only protect people and help people, make them win their battles, but they're also used for protection when they go out to sea and everything else. You can realize how important these ideas are. Is this making sense? You can see, okay, so she's a big deal. So many different levels. Okay, we're at number 3. So we're going to get to 10, and then we're going to talk about things in more detail. I have too much to tell you. I'm sorry. Number 3. Third, one learns so much about any society through the examination of their beliefs, especially their spiritual beliefs, if they're particularly devoted and passionate about it, as they were with the cult of Artemis of the Ephesians. Because the cult of Artemis Ephesia was so important to so many, the question is, why? Why is it important? What made the cult of Artemis Ephesia so important to so many, right? What kinds of questions did it answer, right? What kinds of needs did it meet? What kinds of day-to-day life did it offer to the individual, right? Why was this belief so satisfying to so many? Now we must realize that Artemis of the Ephesians herself was extremely personal, a very personal goddess. So the personal worship of Artemis Ephesia, yes, was usually through veneration within the family niche. In your home, you had your Artemis Ephesia there. So the image, again, seems to be important. But you're also involved in various public celebrations and rituals through participation in her magical cult. But there's something else that's very unusual. Artemis Ephesia is not a reluctant goddess from the perspective of the Ephesians and others. In fact, the Ephesians believed that she was literally their lady. They called her Our Lady of Ephesus, and very personal. They called her the Epicus. She is the goddess who listens, really listens to what people need. She listens to prayers of her suppliants. Achilles Tatius writes, "Yesterday, when I was weeping at the thought of my coming sacrifice, the goddess Artemis stood before me in a dream and said, 'Weep no more, you shall not die, for I will always be your helper.'" Unquote. Very, very loving, very kind, and compassionate, which not to play down many of the Greco-Roman gods, because some of them are kind, a lot of them are not. A lot of them are not as kind and sweet. This is a little unusual, right? A little bit more personal than usual. Uh, and then the other part is that she is believed to be one who heals you. She was known as using the Ephesian letters and other kinds of remedies that probably didn't work because there's medicinal reasons behind it, but they're using it under the guise of a magical aspect. She was known as a great healer. She was a physician that healed those who were sick. That's an important idea as well. She is also one who is a great rescuer. They are constantly inscribing thanksgivings to her. So there's always people asking that. And it's funny because there's a list of Thanksgivings, and there's lists of people asking for help. They're moving, going across the sea, or they're wanting, their fields to turn out well, and yeah, wonderful things like that. But sometimes they become really specific. I've never seen such specific prayers to any goddess. I'm going to give you an example, and you'll see. There's this one guy. His name is Eutychus. He thanked her for providing money from the temple of Artemis to help pay for a religious meal involving his sister, who was designated as the woman in charge of bringing the towels to the banquet. Thank you, Artemis, for that long inscription. Yeah, I tell you, just detail oriented. It's like I said, I told you, we know too much, and it's funny. But yeah, these for anything you can imagine, they called her Lord, and they called her Kyrie. They also called her Soteria. They called her Savior. She was connected to a salvation called Artemis Soteria, and there was even a temple dedicated to that in the Ortigna Gardens. Is this fascinating? They believe that she could save you in this life, and through the mysteries that are given, so you are saved in the next life also. Isn't that really fascinating? And again, this is unusual. If you're a Greco-Roman scholar, you're already going, yeah, wait a minute, some of these things are pretty rare. It doesn't happen. Maybe in some instances for this one or this one, but kind of compiled together. That's an oddity, and it's unusual. And it does tell us quite a bit. She is also known as one, not only a keeper and protector, but she is also known as the Epiphanius. She is the one who appears. You have Artemidorus and others say that, this goddess actually appears. We see her with our own eyes, and that's unusual too. In fact, they had Epiphany celebrations to see the goddess that were important at that time. And then, of course, some of the Epiphany rituals happened. It's kind of interesting. Once at the full moon and once at the new moon. So they had at least one twice a month. And then they had like this overnight kind of gathering. And during these Epiphany ceremonies, the temple was covered with garland, and it's expected that people will see Artemis, whether in a dream or in real life. Is this fascinating? So you have a personal goddess. You can see this goddess. You can see why she's very popular. So you have lots of stories where she appears, and people go, "Whoa, okay." So I think we're at number 4. Okay, number 4. By investigating the cult of Artemis Ephesia, one realizes that this belief system is not a monolithic belief system. It was understood in many ways during the 1,500 years that it flourished. 1,500 years that it flourished. That's kind of a long time, isn't it? So it did go on but it does change. And one of the best ways to demonstrate that change, I give it as an example, is the cult statue of Artemis of the Ephesians. That's a good one. Take a look at the cult statue, which seems to be really central. And we take a look at it, and we realize that the cult statue changes its form dependent upon the age in which it appears, and how it's interpreted also changes. And sometimes you have multiple interpretations, especially when you take a look at the cult statue of Artemis. The first one, ancient sources will say that is originally formed out of wood. Anton Bammer, who was a renowned scholar of Ephesus, he's been working at the Artemisium since 1965. So he uncovered remains of the cult statue under the Austrians that predated the Croesus temple that was constructed in the 6th century. So this was earlier. Most of what survived are jewels that embellished her image, thousands and thousands of them, beads, precious ornaments, and all the myriads of trappings of a goddess. You have the necklaces, the bracelets, the golden clasps that held the goddess's robes, the golden rosettes that were once sewn upon them, even the great bronze buckle, right, that gathered the cloth right at the waist. The only thing we don't have is the statue because it's made out of wood. So it rotted away, but all the surrounding aspects were there. All of it was there, sitting there rotting in the earth. I met Anton Bammer a couple times. He looks just like Albert Einstein. Google him, you'll see. He looks like Albert Einstein. And we casually talked about all this together. And he's, of course, wearing shorts and sandals, as you do when you're in Turkey. He lived there full time with his wife, Hilki. And he came up and he went through my, which is pretty awesome. He went through my PhD dissertation. That's right. We sat together and he went through it. What an honor, right? And he's going through it and correcting it, and But hey, I felt a lot of confidence after that. So because we spent a lot of time at the New Zealand Pension, which is right next to the Austrian Institute. We spent a lot of time there, just poring over it. And he told me a few other things, which I'm going to bring up throughout the course of the talk, but has to do with Mary. Ooh, something about Mary. So let's keep going. So it's wood at first, and it's interesting because it looks like that the cult of Artemis was connected with trees earlier on. The cult image, for example, Callimachus gives a very nice poem that I have to read. Yeah, I have no choice. I'm compelled to read. In his hymn, it goes like this: "For thee too, the Amazons, whose mind is set on war, in Ephesus, besides the sea, established an image." In Greek, it's pitos, beneath an oak tree. So this image is set in front of an oak tree. "And Hippo performed a holy rite for thee, and made themselves, O Upas queen, around the image danced a war dance first in shields and armor, and again in a circle arrayed in a spacious choir. And the loud pipes thereto piped shrill accompaniment, that they might foot the dance together, for not yet did they pierce the bones of the fawn. And the echo reached unto Sardis, and the Baracathinian range, and they with their feet beat loudly, and therewith their quivers rattled. And afterward, around that image was raised a shrine of broad foundations. Then it shall dawn, behold, nothing more divine, not richer, easily would it outdo Pitho. Wow, lot there, literally pregnant with meaning. So the connection to the founding of sacred site of Artemis is connected to the Amazons. Are you guys seeing? We have other stories that are connected to that. So we find in Ephesus lots of very frieze all over the place of Amazons and battles, and that was on the Temple of Artemis itself. So the Amazons are connected. They set up the sacred shrine. There's this image right before the oak tree, and they do this dance, and they're hitting their shields with their swords. This action will be recreated later on in another context. We'll go there. So, but that's important for you to remember. There is a dance. One thing, can I tell you some more stuff just for fun? I just can't resist. The cult of Artemis, they're really into dancing. They're so into, and do we know how they danced? Yes, we do. Okay, so I'm going to tell you, if you guys want to get ready, I'm going to tell you how to do the Artemis dance. Okay, they really do have an Artemis dance, and it is recorded. So what you have to do, first you have to be, first of all, it can be male or female, and they call it acrobatus. All right, and what they do is, first of all, you got to get on your tiptoes. Yeah, okay. So you get on your tiptoes like a ballet. It gets even more hard. You have to then leap into the air a little bit, and you clap. Then you have to descend all the way down on your haunches, and then you leap back up again. And they have people doing this holding incense. I can see a disaster here. It's everywhere, But the incense dancers will do this, So you guys got it? Tiptoe, right? Leap, clap. I'm thinking, how could they do that? Well, remember, it's not a little string incense. It's this handheld incense thing. Handheld. It has like a bulb on top, so you can do the clapping. So I know you're thinking of like a little string of incense, but they do have a little organized there. And then you go down your haunches like a bird, and you go up. In fact, they describe it as a bird dance. Okay, so yeah, so they're into dancing, and they had other dances too. Did you know that when they served the sacred meals and the offerings, the people who did so always danced? So they're dancing, holding the offerings, and they had processions of these, usually women. Although you got some men too involved. Around the Prytaneum, you had this guy who was the acrobatus for over, what was it, almost 50 years. We have how long he was there. And so this guy must have been in his 70s when he retired, and he was doing this leaping dance. And I'm just like, the mental picture that's coming out of this, yeah, so is pretty extraordinary. But again, we do know so much. By the way, the guy is he served from 50 to 98 CE doing these dances, and his name is Olympicus. So now you know his name, and you know how long this guy was going on for. So yeah, so when you have the image of Artemis of the Ephesians, we got to think there's lots of dancing, and they have processions, and those processions always described in the inscriptions, dancing, dancing, dancing. Is this fun? You guys learning things, right? And so you can see the origin of the sacred dance goes all the way back to these Amazons, dancing around and banging their shields and so forth. The fun part also is that this idea of dancing goes into a special procession that happens happens at least twice a month throughout the year. It goes from the Temple of Artemis all the way out to the or sacred Ortega Gardens and comes back. And they would have the dancing and they have singing, and we have some of their songs too. Okay, well, we'll go through. I can't sing them very well, but I will present a few songs. Where are we at? Oh, okay. We're still at the cult statues. So we have the wooden image, the Ritas, right? And what will happen is that there'll be a succession of these wooden images through time, and there is the association with the oak tree, but there'll be another association too that's important. Pliny the Elder and others will talk about it, and that is with the castus or the Lygos tree, the Anax castus or the Lygos tree, which is not really a tree if you've ever been there. It's just like a big bush. Yeah, and it grows all over Ephesus. It grows all over the site of the temple, and it's so interesting because it's always filled with bees. So the archaeologists try to stay away from these bushes because they keep getting stung, which is fascinating that there's so many bees around the site of the Temple of Artemis because Artemis was connected to bees in many ways. So with the Lygos tree was, they said that the image was not made out of oak, but it was made out of a Lygos tree, the early image. And it's interesting because the Lygos is connected to various other rituals, to Demeter and Persephone and the Thesmophoria, for example. But the leaves and berries are known to, how do I say this, to lower the libido. So calm down the men, but it's also known to reduce pain in childbirth. And Artemis of the Ephesians was connected to as a goddess of childbirth, and they called out to her using the Ephesian letters to relieve their pain as they are giving birth. And it's interesting that the Lygos was used to control that pain. So you can see that Lygos berries are used for other reasons too. It's used to make lactate, to make the mother give more milk. So they have, once again, Artemis is connected as to the idea of the nutrix. She's the one who nurses those she loves. So the Lygos is rather important to the point where Pausanias calls Artemis the Lygos bound. So this is not just me just saying this. This is ancient sources say, no, she's connected to the Lygos. Okay, and so many people thought that maybe early images of Artemis, showing her wrapped, it's her being wrapped in Lygos leaves, connected to protection. So, but she is connected to the plant world as well. So that's important. So moving right along from there, those ideas continue, and you have a great temple of Artemis that is built. Yay! But interesting point here is that before the temple of Artemis was built by Croesus, there were a few sacred sites that have been identified, but there's one sacred site that was associated with Artemis, who is the goddess of the moon and hunt, who was the virgin goddess. And this was worshipped at this one place where the harbor used to be. And of course, obviously, Cadmus and the others, this is where the Greeks had arrived and made their colonies. And this is who they worship, the traditional Artemis. Next to it, archaeologists had found, Anton Bammer found, giving you names now. I showed this guy looked like Albert Einstein, going around, this woolly hair and everything. And they find another, and that's dedicated to the great mother goddess, dedicated to Cybele. So she is the great mother. Well, what happens is King Croesus of Lydia, although he does not have a very happy fate, asking the Oracle of Delphi when the Persians are at his door, hey, what should I do if I attack? And of course, Oracle Delphi says, a great empire will fall. He attacks. Right. The great empire fell is his own, but whatever. Before that, King Croesus, uh, he tore down the two structures, one dedicated to the mother goddess, one dedicated to the Greek moon goddess of the Virgin, and he built one, and that became the Temple of Artemis, the first one. So that means that this temple was no longer dedicated to simply the mother goddess, and it's no longer dedicated to simply a virgin goddess. It was dedicated to a great virgin mother goddess. You guys see a problem here? This is happened around 500 BCE. Everybody is going around worshiping a virgin mother, and they will use that word in Greek contemporaneously and after that. She's the great virgin mother. You can see where this is going to cause a problem later on when early Christian legends will associate, by the time we get to the 4th century, that Mary, Mother of God, arrived in Ephesus and made her assumption there. Because, last I checked, Mary is looked at as a virgin mother. Why in the world would she go to a city that's dedicated to a virgin mother? You can see lines are going to get crossed in a traditional sense. It doesn't mean one is the other, but the results will be a blending, and we'll go into how that works. Is this fascinating? Okay. Well, then, of course, the temple gets destroyed by Herostratus. Oh, let's just say that name. His name was forever to be blasphemed, and I said it. I'm sorry. Anyway, somebody burned down the temple. We know now, according to Anton Emmer, is that he probably didn't burn down the temple. Yeah, poor guy. We know from inscriptions that the old temple was having problems because it's sinking into the swamp. It's having the structural integrity was going down, and they had to really, get rid of it to build something new, built on firmer foundations. So we do have inscriptions saying, "Oh, we rebuilt this," and we see the archaeological evidence of stuff getting a little lower than it should be. So they probably destroy their own temple to build a new one. Oh, there's lots of fun articles on this one. So I can say the word Herostratus and not be cursed for all eternity. Oh, by the way, the thing also is that the reason why it happened is Artemis wasn't there at the time. Accordingly, Alexander the Great was born the same day the fire happened. So Artemis was over there watching the birth. So it's all good, hey, and later on, Alexander the Great arrived and says, you know what I want to do? I want to help build up this temple even more. And the Ephesians are like, oh, great, so just inscribe my name there somewhere, and that'll be great. The Ephesians are all, what are we going to do with this? Oh, I got it. No, that's okay, Alexander the Great, because one god should not make dedication to another god. Anyway, so insane. So a new temple was then built, and it was absolutely huge. Get the idea. I know we don't have a lot of time. It was 3 times larger than the Parthenon. How's that for getting the mental picture of how big it is? Right. We'll talk more about it later, but that's a big temple, huge temple. And we take a look for the statue. We're back to the statue. Well, we look at the statue, and something's changing. First of all, you have the stone statue, which is known as the Endios statue. The Endios statue made by, Endios. Some people, it was made out of wood still, not really polished, because it's polished so often, it started to turn black, And this image starts spreading throughout the Mediterranean. It goes to, for example, the south of France. The Phocians bring that idea over along with a priestess of Artemis of the Ephesians. So Artemis of the Ephesus is being worshipped now in France, and it spreads all the way up to the Paris area because it's very popular. So you go to the Louvre and other French museums, you can see images of Artemis there. There's pretty good ones. So you have that, and the image again looks pretty archaic. The big almond eyes. The hair going down in braids. You got a really stiff. The typical image. Then something changes. It changes, and all of a sudden, we get this polymastic image of Artemis of the Ephesians. So, we still have the almond eyes. We have the tholos, the wonderful crown, right? And we have the ancient looking lips, like stiff a little bit. But then you have these right over, underneath it, you have this area where we have the zodiac or other images connected to fertility around here. You go further down and you have these hanging clusters. We'll talk about that in a little bit. We'll say she's polymastic. And you go further down and you have registers of different images of wildlife, So clearly there's there's a big astrology association above. And then you go further down, you have a connection with wild animals, wildlife, which you see with Artemis in general. But of course, you guys are going, come on, tell me about the boobs. All right. So, okay. So everybody sees the breasts. And do I have an answer for this? Okay, so what happened, we now have found inscriptions, that goes all the way back to the Hittite era. That's even better. And scholars at UCLA have even looked into this. In fact, I used some of their work. But it's what the Hittites used to do is they used to hang offerings in various places. And sometimes these offerings would end up on the cult statue. So they say, I want to thank the goddess for this. And it's not just having to do with fertility. They would say that some of these bags that they hang around the goddess's neck or the god's neck were connected to magic or other kinds of ideas. It's very abstract. And you hang them around these bags, hang them around the neck, and then the image itself empowers them. Then you could take it off. Some other people like the Swiss guy Chappelli, right? He talks about he also did this with bull testicles. So you have, this goes, of course, from the Hittite times. Now we're moving a little bit later. Minoans, Mycenaeans, and later than that. And the concept is that the fertility of the bull is being transferred over to Artemis of the Ephesians, and the bull testicles are hung from the neck, and that's why you have these protuberances hanging around. And is that possible? Of course it's possible. But eventually it will be connected to, because it's at this time, Ephesus early on is connected to agriculture in the community. It'll be connected to products that come from the fields. So whatever there is out there, you're going to hang it around the neck of the goddess. And that you may also include the bull testicles if you want, but you're just hanging stuff. Right. And we know from an inscription from the Britannium that they did this also to the statue of Demeter that was there. So we have other sources that talk about them hanging things around the necks of Artemis as well as other goddesses at Ephesus. So it's kind of a moot point. They did this. So this has to do with fertility. Well, things change. And so eventually we see that these, it's really interesting. Artemis, her breasts, or sorry, the hanging stuff goes higher and up, higher up her chest. Time goes on. It's like a breast lift or something. And then we take a look at her, and these start looking like breasts. In fact, we have even Fleischer documents a few that have nipples. Well, obviously they have nipples. It's a breast, right? We also have Vinicius Felix, who was there before the temple was destroyed, as well as Jerome, also calling them breasts. So did people think they were breasts? Well, yeah. Who else thought they were breasts? The Ephesians. Who says so? The Ephesians. Oh, Nutrix. She's the one who nurses them over and over again in the inscriptions. She's presenting as nursing them. So the Ephesians start moving it to this personal association. This is fascinating. So she went from just simply an agricultural goddess, right, where you hang your first fruits up as offerings, she becomes a personal one who breastfeeds you. It's the Nutrix. Now, a lot of people say, yeah, but everybody believed this. Of course, not everybody believed this at that time, because The great part about Artemis of the Ephesians is that people interpreted that image not only differently throughout time, but even whatever time you're in, they had different interpretations. Because as a universal goddess, people have different ideas of what they are. And I think that anomaly gives it an added attraction, right? So you can see there's a flexibility there that is important. When it comes to the zodiac, usually it is the representation of the crab, and you're going to see obviously and obviously you're going to see the signs of Gemini sign and the Taurus and everything else. We don't have time to go over the zodiac, although Aries and Scorpio were represented, but that's too interesting, and that would be like another talk. Yeah. So if you ever want to get my book, I just want to say this. I actually put down together the entire calendar. Those who haven't know, a calendar date and how the zodiac works, and what the sacred days are, and how those days match up to our days today, which will be a little off because of, things are moving in the stars, so to speak. But there you have it. We're at number 5. How do we get to number 5? What happened there? Time is going so. Number 5. The cult of Artemis of the Ephesians gives us an insight into the forces behind ancient syncretistic, expressions, reveal a polytheism that is rapidly becoming inclusive to the point of universals, with Artemis Ephesia herself viewed as a universal goddess. So it almost seems there's a slightly inclusive monotheistic strain in Artemis of the Ephesians that's going on, that's popularizing these ideas at the same time that Christianity. This is interesting, right? So there are interesting points. Of course, she includes lots of goddesses within her mantle. Have Cybele, who we just talked about, who is the great mother goddess, also known as the Great Mountain Mother. They called her the Great Mountain Mother. That's great in inscriptions. And Cybele was connected to a mountain that was near the Temple of Artemis, known as Mount Pion. And I have been to Mount Pion, spent a lot of time there. I've taken naps there. I've crawled into the cave and fallen asleep for a long time. I do a lot of sleeping. It gets hot. I'm sorry. Ephesus is hot. Okay? And archaeologists take naps. They do, and Sabine's always good about it. We got to take a break. We're all going to die. We're going to continue in the later afternoon. Yes, I have actually slept in the sarcophagus. Ooh, with the Tomb of the Seven Sleepers. Okay, but there's a cave in the middle of Mount Pion, and it was a sacred cave that I've explored. I've seen all the way up throughout the mountain, places dedicated to Cybele. Google, you can see this, even carved into the side. You can see it from the Sacred Road. So Mount Pion was holy to Cybele, and the Great Mountain Mother represented that way. Down the way, as I mentioned before, here you have Artemis, who's connected also to Cybele and also to the Virgin Goddess down the way. And this is connected to a tree. I like this. So you got a tree over here by where the harbor used to be, and over here, which is connected to Artemis and Cybele, and over here you have a sacred site dedicated to Cybele, the Great Mountain Mother. Are you guys following so far? Further away, you have another site, and it's a holy grove, a sacred grove that's dedicated it's dedicated to various spirits, nature spirits, and that's the Ortygia Gardens, sprites and spirits of all kinds. And the sacred grove will also be connected to an aspect of Cybele. Are you guys following this? And so now you have a sacred tree, a sacred mountain, and a sacred grove. Well, we're not done yet. The ancient Ephesians, they decided to bury their dead right along the edge, the perimeter of the sacred mountain. I was there in 2008 when Sabine Lutzdatter discovered a shrine dedicated to Hecate. And it turns out that the whole perimeter of the mountain was dedicated to Hecate. That's fascinating. So Hecate, of course, is the chthonic goddess, the underworld goddess, right? She is the one who connects to the dead, and she's the one carrying that torch and going down below and giving illumination. And then you have her rising up because she's declared on inscription from Ephesus, Hecate Soterea. And sometimes we see Artemis Hecate Soterea. Is this salvation? Is this not fascinating? And so the hope of the dead are at the perimeter of the mountain. Well, now this is really complicated. Now you're following this. You got a sacred tree, which will now become the temple of Artemis, the great temple that is one of the seven wonders of the world. You got the sacred mountain dedicated to Kibli. Around the perimeter, it's dedicated to Hecate. And over there, you have a sacred grove that will become dedicated to the place where Leto gave birth to Artemis and Apollo. So the grove is now connected to the place where Leto. In fact, as it turns out, Leto was connected as a mother goddess, but she's also connected to the various spirits within nature. And Leto is connected to the very ancient stratum that goes before so many of them, before the Minoans and before the Mycenaeans. She is a goddess connected to Alluvians. This is awesome. So Leto, the Alluvian goddess, but what will happen is that she gives birth to Artemis and Apollo, and this will become the place, a tourist attraction, where everybody wants to go and see the place where Artemis was born. In some cases, Apollo. Sometimes they still have them on the island, and sometimes they don't. Of course, the Ephesians, they say it all happened there. In fact, it was such a big deal that they had asylum rights for the area because of the fame, especially around the Temple of Artemis, but also around other areas. And Tiberius Caesar, according to Cornelius Tacitus, the famous Roman historian, says, we're going to kind of reduce all these asylums. Too many people who are thieves and robbers are finding safety in these temples. And the envoy from Ephesus said, yeah, but we're the place where Leto gave birth to Artemis and Apollo. And Tiberius Caesar said, hey, that's good enough. So that shows you how famous the Ortega Gardens were. Just making sense. You guys got it. Okay. So now here's the missing link. There happened to be one time a great battle. It looked like they're going to lose. This is early on in the Archaic era. And so somebody tied a rope around the Temple of Artemis and tied it to the city walls. And the power of Artemis was believed to move through the rope to the city and protected the city from harm. So they got an idea. We can make this a good deal by making our own sacred road, which is called the Via Sacra. The Via Sacra then will connect the Temple of Artemis, where the tree was. It will actually go around Mount Pion. Isn't that cool? It'll go around Mount Pion. So it'll include Kibli. It'll include also Hecate. Then on the other side, you have what's called a triadas, or a three-way crossing, that's dedicated to Artemis Hecate. This is where the famous library of Celsus is, and this is where the altar of Artemis Hecate still stands. And if you don't believe me, go to the Mausius Mithridates Gate, right next to the library of Celsus, and take a look, and you can see images of Hecate. And of course, the new triadas will be next to it. And then that road goes from there to the Ortega Gardens. And so the processions, the Via Sacra was looked at as magical, and they built altars all along this way. And the processions would stop at these altars, do a sacrifice, go to the next altar, do a sacrifice. And of course, they're all dancing around twice a month. That's a lot of times. So it got to the point where another. So you figure 24 official ones every single year. You're going to get used to this after a while, right? Empowering these areas. And what they do basically to start the Temple of Artemis, they discovered in the last decade a sacred theater where they start out right next to the temple. We even found the starting point. It goes by the Temple of Artemis. It goes around the one side of Mount Pion, inclusive, of course, the dead areas, because they're buried there, and to the Triadas, and then it will go out over to the Ortega Gardens, and then they'll backtrack to the theater. And so the theater in the city itself, where the Demetrius the silversmith, that one, they all gather there for the kind of like the after party. And then it goes back around the other side of Mount Pion and then returns back to the temple. Is this cool? So they would do this. This is all, again, energizing, giving power to the site. So, and you're thinking we're done. Well, guess what? We also have Isis. Isis slips into the mix. We know Isis has been part of, you dig down below, and we actually have found ivories of Bess and others, bits and pieces connected to Egypt underneath the Temple of Artemis before the 7th century BCE. And what they do is that they build what's called a serapeum. It's actually dedicated to Serapis and Isis along the processional route, of all places, that connects from the Mount Pion out to the Ortega Gardens. You go right by that, and you have an amalgamation where they will have Serapis and Artemis together side by side, not only in inscriptions, not only in huge images. We're talking really big images of the two together, but we also see this in coinage together. So this is a known thing. So you can see the Isis Nutrix aspect also will blend in. And did you guys know the Ptolemies had Ephesus for a period of time? They did. So it was part of the Egyptian Empire for a short period of time. And they did have a lot of influence, right? And of course, Demeter. I just want to say it with Demeter. I know in our minds we think Greek, Demeter. You can't connect with Artemis. Yes, you can. Demeter, right? So you guys know there's a connection. I won't go through the whole thing, but it's connected to obviously the idea of Mater, mother, right? And of course, it is the mother goddess, and you have that concept there. And the Ephesians saw that connection. So Demeter is Artemis from their perspective. Who says so? The Ephesians say so. Where? In their inscriptions. Where else? The Britannium. Where else? They have a statue dedicated to it. Oh, wow. Too much information. Okay, moving right along. So you can see that she's an amalgamation of all these things, and you're going to think, well, why not Mary? Mm-hmm. Okay, so here we go, because she's already open to all these aspects. Let's go to number 6. Wow, number 6. We realize, number 6, that the sacred geography of the city of Ephesus itself directly influenced how Artemis Ephesia was understood and even how she developed. Thank goodness, I just did that. Cart before the horse. Whew, good. Okay, we covered that. Check. Number 7. While this belief was one of the most important in the Greco-Roman era, today this belief system is no longer prevalent. And the importance here is to ask the question, what happened? Just what happened to one of the most powerful cults of antiquity? And so the study becomes important in that it investigates how a religious belief begins, grows, becomes dominant, changes, and then gradually dies or transforms into something else. Ooh. Okay, number 8. The study of the cult of Artemis Ephesia challenges scholars to dramatically reinterpret the importance of the role of women within an ancient Greek and Roman context. Women were large and in charge, seriously, big time, in the cult of Artemis of the Ephesians. You do have many women who are leaders, writing hymns and head of the priesthood and so forth. You're going to have Claudia Trophimae, who's very important, who's not only the high priestess, but later on she becomes in charge of the Britannian. And you have others that will become the priestess of all Asia. Many of the women from there, they start off doing, decorating the image of Artemis. And then they move into the high priestess, and then they move to the Prytain, and then they move to be an Asiarch. That's kind of a big deal. The imperial cult, all the way up. By the way, hardly any other province shows this fluidity of women in these positions. Women were very powerful. A lot of the buildings, take a look at the inscriptions around Ephesus, were paid for by these wealthy women who are connected to not only the imperial cult, but also the cult of Artemis of the Ephesians. So we have, I'll give you a name because I'm putting generalities. I give you specifics. Bedia Marcia, there we go. She was high priestess of Artemis between 93 to 100. Then she moved up to Britannis, and then she became the high priestess of all Asia. There, now you have a name. Hold on to. Now, Artemis was also involved in protecting women, very protective of women in every way. Protecting women. She's considered the great virgin goddess. So she's very protective of women's virginity, but she's there all along with women. She's there to protect women in childbirth. She's then there to make sure that girls are taken care of. And if they're not taken care of, there's ways to take care of them elsewhere, being given to the temple if they have no parents. Are you guys getting this? Right? Other possibilities. And then we know that Artemis is connected to menstruation, and she's connected to, which is really fascinating. When it comes to puberty, I'll have to read this because it's too good. Okay, puberty is my book, so I'm quoting myself. Okay, at the time of puberty, when menstruation began, the maiden put on a special girdle to mark the occasion, while a tampon was made by wrapping linen around a small piece of wood. Ooh, anyway, the first girdle was later offered to Artemis after their first sexual encounter, giving the goddess the epithet Lysimes, which means the releaser of the girdle. Of course, besides a girdle, the maiden soon-to-be woman was required to make other offerings to purchase her freedom from the goddess, who was not always eager to release her, reluctant to free her of her maiden side. And Artemis also untied a few more girdles on other occasions too. On the women's official wedding night, did you guys notice? Wait, the women's official wedding night, another girdle? There's a one girdle and there's another girdle between. Oh boy. Only after asking Artemis was she allowed, and the spouse has to ask Artemis, can I ungirdle her? There's even a fun ceremony. I'm now running out of time. There's even a fun ceremony where the person is about to get married, and what she does is she ritually runs to the temple of Artemis, and she holds on to the pillar, and he's supposed to try to pull her away from it. Of course, she goes, "Oh, I let go." Yeah, you can't make this up. I wish people knew this information. It's driving me crazy. All right. Okay, so even the small little things, but so yeah, women are very important. And so moving on, nine. Understanding the cult of Artemis Ephesia is fundamental to understanding the development of early Christianity. Now we're getting some eyebrows raising up here. Now, understanding what the beliefs related to Artemis of the Ephesians, as well as Christians, we can now chart a gradual shift in Christianity as it moves from toleration in the 1st and 2nd centuries to a gradual lack of toleration in the 3rd century, to downright persecution during the 4th century. By tracking, those who deem Christianity should return to its roots will realize through so many sources, they would then have to not only be tolerant of the belief system of Artemis of the Ephesians, but that they also have to be tolerant of other religions as well. Did you guys realize that when it came to the belief system of Artemis of the Ephesians, they were very tolerant? Early Christian sources are all, well, let it be, let it go. Yeah, even in the book of Acts, the town clerk is like, he's not going against our goddess. He's just going against the image idea. Even many of the pagans at that time were against images. You guys getting that? But Paul's not against that. How that slipped into the New Testament, I have no idea. But it got in there. And that idea continued into going into the 2nd and into the early 3rd century. It's fascinating to study this. So you don't find any harsh words. They just kind of live and live until we get to the 4th century when religion and the state mix together. Then it becomes a whole other issue altogether. So you don't mix politics with religion, basically. But otherwise, the Christians will live and let live when it comes to the cult of Artemis of the Ephesians. 10. Also in relation to Christianity, the belief for the cult, not a cult, cult of Artemis of Ephesia did not completely disappear. An aspect of it continued on and transformed into the cult of the Virgin Mary. Yes, I don't have a lot of time, but I want to give you some details on this. And I want to talk about a few other things real quickly. You give me some time. But this is kind of a huge deal. So basically this, where does this idea come from? It comes actually from the Gospel of John. What? Yeah, I know. Jesus looks down from the cross and says to John the Apostle, all the other disciples abandoned. You know, you got 3 women and you got John sitting there. Peter's not denying. He says, behold your mother. So from there on out, wherever John went, Mother Mary was said to go out also. You guys following that? Well, of course, many scholars say most likely Mary died in Jerusalem. That's not the point. Most scholars agree that a John, some John, there's sometimes multiple perspectives of which John wrote the Gospels, the epistles, and the book of Revelation. Anyway, we still have evidence from the 2nd century that John went to Ephesus. You know, Irenaeus of Lyon says so. Clement of Alexandria says so. Oh, wait, I'm giving you sources. I know. John went to Ephesus. So the assumption is, well, if we read this, Mary must have gone with him. Are you guys getting that? That's the assumption. Not a great place for Mary to go if she went there, because they're worshiping a great virgin mother, which doesn't seem to be a problem in the first couple of centuries, because they're not thinking about virgin mother, because early Christians believed that they, which he had, of course, other brothers, right? Except the proto-evangelism of James, the rest say, yeah, he's got brothers there. Okay, so are you guys following that, right? So that virgin idea is not that big. But meanwhile, Artemis is looking kind of interesting. You have Our Lady of Artemis, and she starts having a veil around her head, which is fascinating. If you take a look at her images, her hands are like this. Take a look at those hands. It's like, wow, that's fascinating. And then the inscriptions are constantly saying, well, obviously, Virgin Mother. As we go along, this image now is on their coins. Yes, we got coins that looks just like Mary, and it's Artemis. That is in circulation. And by the way, I have one in my book. You take a look at it for yourself. You can see it. And she's becoming more and more, how do you say that? More and more looking like a veiled virgin as time goes on. Well, what happens is that in the 4th century, you got a group of Christians that saw Mary as a goddess. That's not so important, but there's a beginning of the elevation of Mary. And by the time we get to the later part of the 300s, they start saying, you know what? John went there, Mary went there too. Now, all of a sudden, the trappings of Artemis and its belief systems start to merge with the Christian ideas of how to venerate Artemis. They had these Ephesian letters, they had these beads that represented, of course, the processional route. And of course, each bead, Artemis and the Ephesian, you go through it. Buddhism has these, everybody has these beads. Everybody loves beads. So beadology. But this is connected also to Artemis, because the Ephesian letters were connected to these amulets that have beads. Are you guys getting this already? So these ideas start to mix up, and meanwhile you have the prohibition of paganism, and everybody in Ephesus is still worshiping Artemis. We got to do something. So they go, okay, we'll just switch over. Same rites, same kind of offerings. Under Artemis and the Ephesians, they always poured this really thick and has a lot of aftertaste, this Pramenian wine dedicated to Artemis. We'll just do that for Mary. We always have the frankincense we burn for Artemis. We'll just do it for Mary. It's business as usual. Just nobody will notice, sleight of hand. And so in popular culture, and then what are you going to do when it comes to various places? Like the Serapeum was dedicated to Serapis, Isis, and of course, Isis as Artemis. What are you going to do? It's going to be dedicated according to an inscription, dedicated to John and Mary, of course, church. Then another place and location, you have the Libyan, that there'll be another church dedicated to Mary. And as Anthony Dammer told me, the guy I just told you about earlier, the Albert Einstein guy, they found that the Temple of Artemis was mostly destroyed. 262, it suffered a lot of damage. 261, 62, earthquake, Goths, terrible things. It was rebuilt in a smaller way, but by the time you get to the time of John Chrysostom, 401, 402, it's in ruins. But the leftovers were turned into a church dedicated to Mary, the very site. And if you think you're not convinced yet, that's okay, because there's at the Council of Ephesus. And in the year 431, there's a Council of Ephesus. And, it was a strategic move. They knew there's a debate between, is Mary the mother of God, or is Mary the mother of Christ? Is she Theotokos or is she Christotokolos? What is she? Is she mother of God, mother of Christ? And they hold the debate there. What do you expect you're going to hear? So all the people in the streets are mother of God, mother of God, mother of God. Guess what the decision made? Mary becomes mother of God, and all those features and aspects of the cult of Artemis of the Ephesians get hooked on to Mary, and right away those trappings go right to Rome, Church of Santa Maria de Maggiore, which is built soon after. This is fascinating and spreading throughout Byzantium. So it is mixed together. How's that? So fun stuff. Probably too many fun things talked about. I do want to finish off just a few little thoughts here. I do want to mention that we do know exactly, how they did their the rictuals, and I know I don't have a lot of time, but I just want to mention a few here. That's my notes. Oh yeah, here it is. I just want to read it from the description here about the sacrifices, so you have some more information. Told you the processions go on. When it comes to sacrifices, I'm just reading an inscription from Ephesus, just to give you the idea how detailed they are. The all-prevailing, reasonable fate goddess and father of the head capital dictate that all embracing sacrificial laws be decreed. Pertain should light all the altar fires and should perform incense sacrifice. And for the cult, should set certain days for animal sacrifices, 365 in all. Of these days, 190 days should be restricted to taking out the heart and cutting off the thigh. On the remaining 175 days, however, whole animal should be dedicated, and he is, to be sure, he is capable of his duty, whereby the expenses of the city is to be arranged by the Hierophant, who is also to instruct everyone at the meeting on the regulations concerning the worship of the goddess, as well as to provide advice. This is pretty detailed. So that means that you have a Olympian sacrifice for how many days? 190 days, and a chthonic sacrifice for 175 days. That means there's a sacrifice dedicated to Artemis. How many days? Every single day of the year. That place was going, right? And you're thinking, well, what are they doing? Okay, here we go. The Pertain, that's the guy who's in charge, and the Hierophant, he's the guy who does the mysteries, should receive the heart, tongue, and fur coat from every sacrificial animal as a gift because of their expense. So they can, they're not going to keep all that. It's like, hey, got another fur coat for you, honey. They're going to sell it and use it for other things, right? As well as their servants. The hieroperks, that is the person that makes the announcements. The spondulus, the flute player by the drink sacrifice. The hierospikes, the trumpet blowers, and the two hierophantum, and it goes on. Oh, hieroscopus, the intention shower, and the seven curatim should receive a present appropriate to their role by the call to action. Isn't that nice? Everybody gets something. But however, the single leading regulation, I love this. This is one of my favorite parts of the inscription, is that the Pertain should stay out of debt. Money management. It got so bad that you pretend you're elected each year. You have to contribute at least 5,000 sesterces to buy the position because they got to get the money from somewhere, and then you're supposed to donate all this other for all the called actions. You even have regulation for the hymn singers, how much money you have to. If money makes the world go around, but stay out of debt. He's also should in the atonement decorate the statues and Demeter, the Prytaneum with fruit produced from the fields. Hey, look, there's the inscription, as well as the masters of the temple. Isn't that beautiful? So you have all that. And so we do know how they did their offerings. We do know what order they did this in. Um, we do know that when they approached the temple of Artemis, they went up this ramp that was there and going up to the place of the cult action. And this altar was positioned right in front of the temple of Artemis, and right above there's the Epiphany window. And when the sun was a certain direction, it would bounce off an image in the Epiphany window and would radiate right down into the altar at a certain time, twice a day. Cool. And during this time of the cult action, meanwhile, the priest would be sitting there officiating, doing the various sacrifices as they go through this. Yeah, and then of course, obviously, we have other bits and pieces, but I'm running out of time pretty quickly. So what I'll do is I will say this: is that a few kind of summing up things. I will mention that the Temple of Artemis, here it is. Originally, the Temple of Artemis was under the hierarchs, under the holy a male, I say this, a male priest and of course, obviously a priestess. This was at first, and the mega business was the male priest. The problem is that he had to be celibate, and the people of Ephesus didn't believe in celibacy. So what happened is eventually they had to use outsiders all the time as the male priest. It didn't go over very well. So they decided to change things around. But originally, the Temple of Artemis, as far as the organization is concerned, you had a priest and a priestess. You had various levels of priestesses. You had, for example, those who are the initiates or the learners, and those who are the practitioners. And then when you retire, you end up being, according to the belief system, the teachers. You also had 3 layers of male as well as female priests called the Neophi was those who are the managers, the Essenes were those who are in charge of the celebrations, and the Curates were in charge of the mysteries. But then around 31 to 30 BCE, Augustus Caesar had Vidius Pollio. What he did is split up the belief system where the Temple of Artemis had some officials and the city hall, the Prytaneum, had others. So you had kind of a split in the organization. But the funny part is that somehow the two ends worked together because that sneaky Via Sacra brought them all together as one, and the belief system thrived, and was the passion of so many for so many generations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave you with a hymn. The words from a hymn written by the high priestess as well as the Prytaneum, and the hymn goes as follows, and this is where I'll close up. And this is dedicated to Artemis. Let her satisfy the blessed deities. Let her preserve the fiery light of the city. To you, sweetest spirit, new shoot of the cosmos, ever streaming light, to you who preserve on altars a spark from heaven. Thank you. So much to cover. There's so much I wanted to say, but there's just not enough time. But you get the idea that we know so many details. It gets to be kind of ridiculous after a while. I did want to mention I did find on the source right after I did this. If you guys want to know the processions, who's in what order, I just want to throw this one out. To the altar of Artemis, this happens, of course, every single day. Young maidens were at the front carrying baskets that contained the sacrificial tools, including knives and axes, along with incense, which is usually frankincense, and other needed supplies and utensils. The musicians follow the maidens, and after that, the sacrificial animals covered with garlands, and then the priest. And then for some strange reason, they had the flute players separate from the other musicians after the priests. And then you have the performers of the sacrifice, and then everybody else follows in the procession. So it kind of gives you an idea. By the way, the great altar in front of the Temple of Artemis had stalls for 20 oxen. And so it was a very grandiose slaughterhouse, and which is fascinating. In fact, we have found the bones of the various animals, goats, cattle, gazelles, hares, bears, lions, sheep, pig, donkey, dogs, deer. We find it all. But they sacrificed so many that it was the place where people got their meat. It was the slaughterhouse for all of Ephesus. And only later on, as we get into the 3rd century, was there another meat area. So if you got your meat in Ephesus, it was always sanctified by Artemis. This caused a problem amongst certain people, obviously, because if you're a Christian, you can't eat meat as sacrificed to images. This is making sense, which made Christians either eating fish or vegetarian or finding meat elsewhere. Fascinating. And we have some references to this. So just some other little details I'm throwing in. Any questions?
I had one question. Well, you partly answered it about the incense. You said frankincense. Do you know, were there any other kinds of incense that they commonly use?
Frankincense was big, and amber was another.
Oh.
Yeah, I know it's very strange. Amber? Yeah, amber. Amber is actually the earlier one.
Okay.
Yeah. So amber and frankincense. Yeah. And the wine is really good. Area. I like the wine. I know. They still grow it, by the way. Still, yeah. Well, the cult of the Belisis Artemis of Ephesus, they had, let's go to the commercial aspect. They had frankincense stores and incense stores, and we found an inscription that talked about a person renting one of these, and they also had wine shops, and those are located all over the place. So you go and you buy your Artemis wine that was sanctified by Artemis. So there's a commercial aspect. Also, you can get Artemis fish. They had some sacred ponds nearby because the harbor was retreating, leaving little ponds behind. And this is on the land. And so you can get some nice Salinas sanctified fish that was considered holy. And so they're in the fish business. You got to make money. Yeah. In fact, the mega business, the male high priest, he got rid of his position, as I mentioned, and they had the prytane in the prytaneum in charge. But the mega business was in charge of the treasury, so they gave it to somebody else because they thought he had too much power. And the treasury was very, very involved in making sure that the revenues kept coming in. You got to make money. You got to be creative. And so sure, they get a lot of money from the pilgrims, but they figured out other ways too. So there are other establishments on the side of the temple of Artemis. They found a gymnasium and in a place and other shops that were to facilitate that all the money went there. And yeah, it's fun. Hey, any questions? It's all my book, by the way. Makes you want to read it. No, it's all there. And all the it's all documented, so you can see the inscription. In many cases, I have the inscription in Greek in the bottom, so you can look for yourself, or where to find the inscription. So I'm very big on documentation. So, but we know exactly how the priestly hierarchy operated. We know how it changed. I have the names of everybody. You know, I mean, the question really is, what else do we need to know for certain periods of time? What else do you want to know? Right.
Hmm.
Any other questions?
Oh, maybe that's it.
Have I to use a 1920s phrase, have I flabbergasted people?
May I ask you something about the eligibility for office? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Thank you
If
so much.
some kind of
Great.
in the family or something like that.
So when it came to, let's start with the priestesses. When it came to priestesses, you first of all have priestesses that moved all the way up from being simply slaves of the goddess, and they moved up the hierarchy, doing various duties. Some not as pleasant, the garland hangers and so forth, and you move up to be the one who connects to the jewelry or the outfits of Artemis. You decorate that. That's actually the highest level. And then you, of course, go from there, you can become a priestess or whatever it is. But in other cases, you come from a wealthy family and you want your daughter to be a priestess. It was established, and then they put it in stone in the 160s CE. It's going to cost you 5,000 sesterces. And so you pay for admittance. So there is a pay. So you're going to have a situation where this slave girl who worked all the way up, I'm getting there, and then the rich people will go, yeah, ooh, geez over you now. Oh, great. That's like, because they pay the money. But at the same time, that many of these priestesses, many of them were independent in their own right. So you'll find the names as a priestess, but we'll find also that they dedicated buildings. Even though the idea is they're supposed to be, virgins, that idea went out the window pretty quick. Especially when I see inscriptions, and I have a few of them documented, where it says, priestess of Artemis and her husband, the name, kind of ruins that. So you can have the situation too of dad, husband goes, hey, so dad goes, hey, daughter, you want that position? And also husband goes, hey, you want that position? And they work together because that's a point of patronage. So you have that. There are other ways that people achieved office, and that is through the various through the city system. There's various positions that people hold, and they move up. And to be pertained on the city side was a big deal, but it was by two ways: you were elected, and you paid some money. What is fascinating is before the reform of Pollio, you're a mega business for life, male priest. You are a high priestess for life. After the reform, it's 1 year in my election, and you pay. So it goes. Thank you so much for asking that question. So then, you have the sense of it's a popularity contest. That's involved, right? Who has the most money, but at the same time, also who is the most who is fit in some cases, because there is an election process. And the boule, B-O-U-L-E, oftentimes did the voting, but in some cases, the voting went outside of that into various assemblies. So So you get voted in.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. And
Link for your book in the chat.
oh, are you
It's
going to do that?
available on Amazon.
Available on Amazon. Yep. Oh yeah.
Makes
And
an excellent Christmas gift, by the way.
yeah. They even had the feast of Artemis Datus, where you have we have kids basically, really too young. Basically, you have young maidens and young men going to the seashore, and they're dressed in ritual outfits, and they, of course, taking with them the image of Artemis, and they collected parsley, and they collected celery and seeds, and they collected garlic, and that was in turn brought back to the goddess. Actually, the women did that. The men they gathered salt. So the men did the salt, the women did all the others, and then they come back and they do a great offering there. So you already know that now parsley, celery, and garlic, all used in ancient medicine. They all have medicinal aspects. A lot of pain relievers and curatives done in a certain way. Then what happens is one year the guys forgot the salt, and of course Artemis gets real angry and after eating the salt, you got to make sure you do it right. Anyway, yeah, there's lots of celebrations. You got to hand it to the Greeks and Romans. They did have a nice share of celebrations year round, and the people of Ephesus like to party more than most. So, and I know a lot of the cults, they're all kind of wearing white, but the high priestess was wearing purple, and she had a jeweled crown and fancy outfits. In fact, people made fun of the Ephesians because they thought they were too Persian. They're too much into their elaborate, colorful outfits. It was too loud. Because remember, the Persians, the royal road started at Ephesus, went all the way to Persepolis and Susa. By Pony Express, it only took about 3 weeks to get from one, actually 2 weeks to get from one to the other on 111 postal stations. Anyway, so Persian influence was really big in Ephesus. So they were into the elaborate stuff. So the cult of Artemis of the Ephesians was pretty beautiful to look at. Wearing plumes and great outfits, and we see this in various images. So, yeah, so it's a pretty belief system, and all have all the trappings. And I think it appeals. The personal aspect. I think that people. It's important when it comes to Christianity. I think people were seeking after personal religion with God or goddess during the first century. I think there's this movement that they don't want to have cold rituals anymore. They want to have a relationship with deity, a personal one. And you're going to see this even in Judaism too at this time. There's this personalization. They're living long enough, and they're not no longer dying at 30. So it's not like survival of the fittest situation with each. I'm going to die anyway, so I just make sure I'm able to eat, make sure I have a roof over my head and clothes. What's going to happen is it's going to be like, hey, I'm living long. Maybe I'll start thinking philosophically. Where am I going? Maybe I want to have a relationship. I'm living long enough, and people start getting restless. They want more from their beliefs, and I think that's why Christianity was also popular. Is they want to have a personal connection, and they want to have a universal connection, and they don't want all these difficult rituals to get in the way. And I think that the belief system Artemis of the Ephesians is contemporaneous to that era, that same era, looking for personal religion. And you're going to see exactly the same thing in the cult of Isis. They'll start moving through in the first and second century. So there's this need that our god or our goddess needs to do a little bit more.
I could totally get into a goddess who is kind and caring with fabulous clothes and lots of dancing. Like, sign me up.
Too much dancing. Trying to practice. Some people compared it to a kind of form of ballet because you're on your tiptoes and you're jumping in the air and clapping and then going all the way down. A picture that one man, was it 45, 50 years that one old guy doing this? He had arthritis. He probably just went half lunch. But I think it's funny because we know their names, and I can picture them sitting around doing the call to actions. The one guy, the Howard Kirks, he'll make the announcement. Oh, by the way, later on it'll be a woman. There'll be a few women who'll be the announcer. So that changes. But usually for the announcer, they have the best singers. So I've actually looked at inscriptions and they won singing contests. It's like, hey, you'd be perfect as the Howard Kirks. So they sing, call people in, and then you have the person playing the flute, over the drink offering. And you have, of course, the guy dancing around with the incense, and you have the person, of course, reading the entrails. And then, of course, you have the Hierophant leading people into the mysteries if they want to. But like I said, they're just like one of us, sitting around each other year after year. The dream team that I just mentioned earlier, which I've lost the page now, of these common names. Where do they go here? Oh, lost it. Okay. Like I said, we know the names of these people. And we know, basically it'd be like familiar, like going around going, hey, Earl, how's it going today? It's okay, Tom, because remember, they're stuck with each other 365 days. And they're serving together for 30 to 40 years. Is that incredible? I hope they get time off. I really, when you think about it, I hope they got some time off to do something else. Other than doing the ritual. Oh yeah, here it is. I got the name. So basically, it would be like Medotas, how you doing? Oh, I don't know. Metras, hey Marcus, are you doing okay? They're basically doing that for 40 years. And we have the same list of names for the Temple of Artemis too. So they have their own hierarchies. And they're talking. So I love how much information we have. Again, we have too much information. No more questions? I gotta answer it. You can ask me anything. All right. Okay. Well, if there's no
Probably an obvious question, but it was in modern day Greece, right? The Ephesus.
So Ephesus is located in Turkey today.
Okay.
It is along the coast of the Mediterranean. And there is so much to see there. It's absolutely amazing. Except the Temple of Artemis is not much. Usually they put together one remaining pillar, and it's not even the right height, and there's always a stork's nest on top. So much for the glory days of Artemis of the Ephesians. I like to go there and look at all the frogs jumping around. Around May, there's all these little frogs that are in the ruins in the pond area. It's turning in the marsh. They try so hard it's just not working out. And the marsh just keeps coming back in. There's lots of little fun pond frogs. But there's neat stuff to see elsewhere. There's the Library of Celsus that's there. You got a beautiful theater that's standing. You got the Temple of Domitian that's largely there. You have a beautiful Odeon. So there are things to be seen. A lot of giant bathing establishments that are still there. So it is worth going if you can get there. And it's the surrounding is beautiful. You got vineyards. I love it there. They grow a lot of peaches. So peach trees surround the area, and it's great to be there around the later spring because you just grab a peach and water comes out of the peach everywhere, and people are really friendly, and it's really cheap to stay there. So if you go, if you're right next, I've always had places right next to the Temple of Artemis, and I've stayed for $10, $15 a night. In some cases, I've saved money by being in Turkey and come back with a surplus. So what you do is you eat the food in the market area, stay away from the tourist traps. You stay with friends or stay at these cheaper places, as long as you don't mind having a bump near somebody else, and just enjoy yourself. So thank you, Joan, for being here. So yeah. So anyway, it's in Turkey.
But it was part of the Greco-Roman Empire, I guess, at that time.
So yeah, so it's part of the Roman Empire. Yeah. So the influences of Ephesus are really a mixed. You do have Luvian. You do remember under the Hittites, it was the ancient capital known as Apossus of the Luvians. So the Hittites record this, and of course the Luvians. It talks about the Hittite records talk about that a great star fell at Apossus, which was one of the Luvian capitals. That's fascinating to me because in the New Testament, in the book of Acts, it talks about the image of Artemis coming down from heaven. Well, that legend goes all the way back to the time of the Hittites. So yeah, so there's connections there. And then you have influence that's coming from the Minoans. Sabine Ladstatter discovered a Minoan site there. The Mycenaeans were there. There's a Mycenaean tomb. And then, of course, then later on, you're going to have the Lydian kingdom, and then the Persians, obviously, and then you're going to have, of course, the Greeks back and forth. The Greeks were there before the Persians, and then they lose it, and they gain it again, and they lose it, and gain it again. It's just Greek history. It's called Ionia, and then eventually it will become a part of the Persian again, and then the Pergamene kingdom, and following that, the last Pergamese king, Attalus, dies, and he donates to Rome and becomes part of the Roman Empire. Yeah. And then it'll become part of the Eastern Roman Empire, which is known later on as Byzantium. The city of Ephesus will thrive for a while, but it keeps changing sites, so different locations. So they keep moving it to different locations. But yeah, there's quite a bit to see. Any other questions? So go to Turkey.
And Dorian put a really nice link to the ruins in the chat.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Wonderful. Yeah. So anyway, I would love to write another book on this. So, there's so much more I could even add to this current book. I've done even more research. I would love to do more work on the origins of Artemis of the Ephesians, going into the Luvians and the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, and really going into the late Bronze era in detail, because I see so many interesting connections, not only to this belief system, but transitions within the state of religion and how people view things. So that would be a fascinating study. And I did a talk here already on Artemis of Pergae. And I'd love to do that talk again. And all my sources, one person will get this. All my sources were in German. Yes. The interesting part about it is Artemis of Pergae. Apparently, the English-speaking world hasn't discovered it yet, but it is a direct link with Artemis of the Ephesians, and it links us all the way back to the ancient Luvians. So it's a really cool leftover from that era. Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much for being here. I hope it was fun. ICE is next time.